Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling from. Thank you all for joining us today for the second launch webinar for the ICAP ETS status report. I'll be giving it a few more minutes because people are still coming in, but I'll slowly get started in the meantime. And maybe, as a note of context, we are obviously here for the launch of the ICAP status report. We will be presenting the report to you today, but it's always an opportunity that we want to take to pause for a second and reflect on what are the key trends and developments in DTS space. So over the next hour and a half or so, we will be giving you a brief presentation of the key findings and key takeaways from the ICAP ETS status report 2025. And then we'll have a discussion with a set of panelists to look a bit further and deeper into some of these key developments, and we will also dive into some of the key jurisdictions. If we go onto the next slide, a quick note of context before we get started, and also a quick note of background on why we do this in the first place. For those of you that are not familiar with the ICAP, ICAP is the International Carbon Action Partnership, and we are a partnership that brings together more than 40 governments from across the globe to jointly work on development and implementation of emission trading systems. As a partnership of governments working on compliance emission trading systems, we do a few different things. We obviously facilitate dialogue and learnings across member governments and across governments more broadly, and we do a lot of work to help our member governments understanding and tackling key issues related to ETS design and implementation. We also do a fair amount of capacity building activities trying to promote readiness for ETS uptake in new jurisdictions. And last but not least, we also have a mandate to disseminate information on emission trading systems. And the status report is probably our main, most known and flagship publication in this area of work. So it comes out once a year, and it condenses all the latest and most up-to-date information on the world of compliance emission trading systems. If we go on to the next slide, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about what we will do today. So in a second, I'll be done with the welcome and introduction, and we will move on to the presentation on the key findings and the highlights from the ICAP status report. I will be outlining what the key trends and developments are, and then I'll be giving the floor to my colleagues Irina and Victor for a bit of a deeper dive into some of the key findings of the report. We will then move on to a panel discussion with some of the key experts and the policymakers that are at the forefront of ETS implementation in different countries and different regions. And together with them, we'll have a closer look both at again, the overall takeaways from the report, but we'll also be diving into some of the key developments in the jurisdiction they're from or in the countries they work with. Then we're quite keen also to have a Q&A segment with you. On that, I would encourage you to make use of the Q&A function of the webinar and to start putting in questions, comments, or anything that you would like to raise on, both the our presentation, on what the panelists will say, or on anything that you want to comment on or ask a question about. Really, you can start doing so already as we go through the presentation and as we go through the panel discussion. That way we will be able to prioritize and make time for questions accordingly. So don't wait until the end, but feel free to put questions in the Q&A function of the webinar as things come up and as we go through the discussion. If we go on to the next slide again, I also wanted to start delving into the report now. And if we go on to the next slide, first of all, I wanted to say a quick word about what the report is about for those of you that might not be fully familiar with it already. I mean, as I said, it is our flagship publication. It is a publication where we try to distill all the key trends and information on the state of play in ETS implementation globally. The report does have a focus on compliance emission trading systems. So you will predominantly find in there information related to mandatory schemes and to compliance forms of emission trading systems around the world. We obviously also work quite closely with the colleagues from the World Bank on their own publication, the state and trends of carbon pricing that looks more broadly across different forms of carbon pricing. When it comes to our report, and also when it comes to the mandate that we have as ICAP, we tend to focus on compliance emission trading systems. In the report, you will find a foreword authored by the ICAP co-chairs, which sets the tone for the discussion, an executive summary that distills and condenses some considerations around what we think are the key and most interesting developments in the emission trading space globally. You will also find infographics that we will also show some of those on the webinar today, but you will find infographics that condense and distill in a visually accessible way some of the key information, some of the key data, and some of the key dimensions related to the implementation of ETSs globally. And last but not least, the core part of the report is the 58 fact sheets that outline key information on all of the emission trading systems already in force, under development, and under consideration across the world. Also, I wanted to say that all the information that is in the report is double-checked, verified, and checked with our point of contacts in different governments and in different countries and in different jurisdictions, which is in a way the beauty of the report as well. So you know that all the information that is in there has been double-checked by policymakers that are working on the development of these emission trading systems. And with that, before I dive into the presentation, I also wanted to say thank you to, again, all of the governments and all of the jurisdictions that work with us on the production of this report. I'm conscious that it's a big ask for them to once a year review all the information that we send them, but this is really what ensures the quality and comprehensiveness of the report. So we're really grateful for the time they put into this. We are obviously also grateful for the members and observers of ICAP who support the work and the production of this report. And last but not least, I also wanted to say a big thank you to Irina, Victor, and all of the other colleagues from the ICAP Secretariat who have worked really hard on this report over the last few months. As I said, it is our flagship publication. It is also the biggest effort and undertaking that we typically do in a year. And from my point of view, I wanted to say thank you to the team, and it's great to see another great report being released. With that, I think we can start diving into the substance of it, and we can start looking a bit more closely at what this year report has to say about the state of play in ETS implementation. So if we move on to the next slide. I just wanted to mention a few key trends that stood out for us and that we think are, the defining trends for the ETS space at the moment. At the same time, there's obviously much more into the report. I would encourage you to have a look at it and see what you think and understand what stands out for you as you go through the report. But this is what stood out for us. So first of all, we wanted to point out that the momentum for ETS development and implementation is continuing, And it is a process that, especially in the last few years, has been driven by key emerging economies and developing countries. First of all, it's no secret to anyone that we have seen a massive growth and the uptake of emission trading systems globally over the last decade or so. Again, if we look back 10 or so years, both the number of emission trading systems and the global emissions covered under those emission trading systems caps has more than doubled. And again, we are coming out of a period of really impressive and fast growth and uptake of emission trading systems around the world. And again, this is a process that, especially lately and also in the coming years, has been driven and will be driven by key emerging economies and developing countries, especially G20 economies. I mean, we've seen that China and Indonesia have launched systems over the last few years and are now working on refining them and expanding them. At the same time, we do have systems that are being actively developed and worked on in key G20 economies such as India, Brazil, and Turkey that are expected to come online in the next few years. And again, emerging economies and developing countries are at the forefront of the development of the next generation of emission trading systems. That is also resulting in new and innovative system designs being developed. We all know that there's no single blueprint for how to develop an emission trading system, but every single jurisdictions and policymakers in every single country always try to understand how to adapt the concept of emission trading to their local circumstances, priorities, and needs. And this notion combined with, again, an increasing uptake of emission trading systems in more and more countries is also resulting in an increasing diversification when it comes to system design, when it comes to the features of the system, and when it comes to understanding how to design these systems. So we are seeing, for example, an increasing shift towards combining different forms of carbon pricing in one single policy mix, and also we are seeing an increasing attention towards intensity-based forms of emission trading systems, or systems that, for example, have intensity-based caps, as it's the case in China, for example. We are also seeing, especially in these new generation of emission trading systems, increasing attention to the use of offset credits as a compliance option in the system. This means that offset protocols and offset provisions are increasingly at the core of the system design of the next generation of emission trading systems, especially. It's happening predominantly at domestic level, whereby an emission trading system in one country sources domestic credits from domestic crediting mechanisms in the same country. And we'll dive a bit more into this later, but it is, again, a feature that is becoming more and more predominant in emission trading systems across the globe. At the same time, we also have emission trading systems that have been around for a while. The EU ETS has recently celebrated the 20th birthday. Other systems have been around for well more than a decade as well, and these established emission trading systems are still going through a process of constant evolution, refinement, and solidification. And a couple of key trends that we are seeing across different systems at the moment are an increasing focus on the expansion of the scope of emission trading systems. And I mean, we're seeing this in Europe, in the UK, but also in China, which is about to expand the scope of the system to sectors beyond the power sector, which was covered so far. And another discussion that is starting to pop up more and more in policy circles in established emission trading systems is the whole discussion around what will come in, what will happen next for these systems, and what these systems will look like in the future, especially from the point point of view of alignment with the net zero goals, net zero targets, and there's an ongoing discussion that tries to understand what emission trading systems can look like in a net zero scenario. We have actually done quite a lot of work on this topic as ICAP, and a couple of weeks ago we launched a report that looks specifically at this topic of alignment of emission trading systems with net zero targets and the role that ETSs can play in a net zero scenario. So if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to look up the recording of the webinar and also the report itself, which again came out a couple of weeks ago. But this is a process, and this is a discussion that is fair to expect will be defining the policy discussions in established emission trading systems over the coming years. A lot of this has to do, obviously, with integration of removal credits in emission trading systems, understanding whether and how removal credits can play a role in emission trading systems. But it's obviously a much broader discussion that has to do with understanding what role emission trading systems can play in a net zero policy mix. So there's much more to the picture. And again, it's a fascinating topic. I would encourage you to delve into it. Last but not least, I think it's also fair to recognize that even though we are, coming out of a period of rapid growth and really positive momentum for ETS implementation, challenges are looming on the horizon. This is no secret to anyone. It's a result of the current geopolitical and economic uncertainties that are, posing risk, uncertainties, and challenges for ETS specifically, but also for climate policy and international cooperation and action on climate more broadly. So it is not something that is targeted explicitly to carbon pricing or to emission trading systems, but it is the result of an overall macroeconomic and geopolitical context that is to some extent challenging and unpredictable. On this point of view, one key priority for the future will be to ensure the acceptability and support for carbon pricing and for emission trading system specifically, both in the context of covered entities and consumers or society at large. It has to do obviously with on one hand, making sure that industrial competitiveness is protected and ensured, and we're seeing this conversation popping up more and more in many different jurisdictions, but it also has to do with making sure that consumers are protected from unintended impacts of carbon pricing or energy costs more broadly. This is obviously can be done through the use of revenues and through other instruments as well, but we're expecting this discussion. So on one side, understanding how best to use the revenues to this goal, and on the other side, how to maintain the societal support for emission trading systems. We're expecting these two topics to be at the front and center of the stage in the coming months and years, and it is one of the key challenges that policymakers, but also us as the carbon pricing community more broadly, will have to face in the coming years. With that, I'll keep it to that for the key trends and outlooks. I'll be now handing over the floor to my colleagues Irina first and Victor later for a deeper dive on some of the key findings of the report. With that, Irina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here and happy to present some of the key highlights from this year's report. And let us move to the first slide, where I would like to show you some key figures from this year's report. And let us begin maybe with the coverage. There are currently 38 emissions trading systems in force worldwide, including 2 newcomers this year, which are in states of Oregon and Colorado in the US. Cumulatively, these systems now cover over 10 gigatons of CO2 emissions, and the share of global emissions covered by ETSs now slightly increased and reached 19%. When we look at revenues, in 2024, the systems raised together $70 billion in revenue, which is slightly less than in 2023. And Victor will elaborate a little bit on some of the reasons behind that later in the webinar today. This still takes the total ETS revenues to $373 billion, cumulatively starting from 2007. In terms of development progress, there are currently also 11 systems that are under development at different stages, and also additional 9 systems that are being under consideration, predominantly in Southeast Asia and in Latin America. Finally, now nearly 1/3 of the world's population already lives in systems in regions covered by an ETS, and these jurisdictions with an ETS in place now represent about 58% of global GDP. Moving on to the next slide, here we can explore our ETS map. Yes, this is the one that provides us with a snapshot of the current status of ETS developments across the globe. And let me walk you through some of the most exciting developments, starting from Asia Pacific this time. Well, it has been an eventful year for the Chinese ETS. In 2024, a new regulation establishing a robust legal foundation for the national ETS was approved, and also the government is going ahead with extending the system to the cement, steel, and aluminum industries. The covered entities in these sectors are expected to face the compliance obligation already for their 2024 emissions, and we look forward to hear from our Chinese colleagues more today on those, as well as on other interesting developments that took place in China in the last year. In India, the government adopted detailed regulations for the compliance mechanism under the existing carbon credit trading scheme. This mechanism will take a form of this intensity-based baseline and credit system. And again, it's great to have Meenakshi today with us to tell us more about this new system. In Japan, the work is ongoing to transition from the current voluntary ETS to a mandatory one next year. And finally, one more highlight in the region is Vietnam, where a pilot ETS for high-emitting sectors is set to launch in June this year, with then the full implementation planned by 2029. Moving on to the European continent, the EU ETS continues to be the largest system in force in terms of trading value and volume. And following 2023 reforms, of course, important changes to the system's ambition and scope took effect in 2024, including downwards adjustment to the cap. The scope of the ETS has extended to also cover now emissions from maritime transport and from most flights to and from the EU's outmost regions. The new separate ETS for buildings and road transport, also known as EU ETS 2, is underway with the full transposition into the member states' law to be finalized soon following the 2024 deadline. And it will be great also to hear the latest from Ruben today on how this all unfolding. In Germany, in early 2025, related to this, the government adopted a transition law that confirms the phase out by the end of 2026 of its national ETS for heating and transport fuels, as this will basically transit into the EU ETS. The UK is in the progress of consulting stakeholders on the scope expansion, and also implements a number of reforms to align the system with the net zero 2050 target. And I will leave it to Alice to provide us with more details on that. In Ukraine, the preparation of the regulatory framework for its national ETS has seen some good progress. In December last year, the Ukrainian parliament approved the law on basic principles of climate policy that mandates an ETS. And then later in January this year, the mandatory reporting under MAV system was reintroduced following its suspension in 2022 due to the Russian war of aggression against the country. Finally, Turkey is preparing to launch its ETS with the long-awaited pilot phase planned to start in 2026. The government completed some technical analysis for the draft climate law in 2024, and now we are kind of looking towards the final parliamentary adoption that is expected somewhere in the first half of 2025. Last but not least, let's turn to Americas. This is the region where we also witnessed quite some movement. The two new systems that came online this year are both in this region, in Oregon and Colorado, as I already mentioned. In Colorado, ETS regulation came into force in 2025, and trading is set to start in mid-2025. In Oregon, the government reinstated its climate protection program after it has been invalidated a year ago, so basically in 2023. The program now sets enforceable declining emission caps on fossil fuel use in the wide range of different sectors, including residential and transport, and also, of course, for the emission-intensive industry. But the good news came also from Washington State, where Cap and Invest program has been successfully completing its first compliance period, and where also the public vote in November 2024 decisively rejected an initiative to repeal the legislation underpinning the program. California and Quebec are both about to start rulemaking process to design the future of both systems. And then looking at Canada, their draft regulation was published in November 2024 to establish a new federal cap and trade system for upstream oil, gas, and LNG production. But of course, we understand that any further developments for carbon pricing in Canada will now depend on the outcome of the upcoming election. Finally, let's move down south and look at Latin America and Caribbean. Here, of course, for us, it was the Brazil that made major headlines with the law establishing the Brazilian greenhouse gas emissions trading scheme approved in December last year. The law lays out the governance framework and the legal foundations for compliance obligations, but some key design elements such as scope, cap, and allocation are to be determined in the coming years. Finally, Dominican Republic is featured in our report for the first time this year, as the government is advancing its work on the pilot ETS, building on the ETS roadmap and the national simulation exercise developed in the previous periods. Well, that is it from my side, and I will now pass it on to Victor to walk us through further status report insights.
Thank you very much, Irina. In the next slide, we are going to see the absolute coverage of greenhouse gas emissions by emission trading systems. And what we can see is that several systems have come online in recent years. In 2025, we expect emissions coverage to remain mostly stable at around 90% of global emissions, just as Irina was mentioning. One thing that might be interesting for the audience to note is that typically the growth in absolute emissions coverage that comes due to the introduction of new systems tends to be offset by the decrease in emissions under the ETS caps. So in that sense, we could say that ETSs are victims of their own success. We expect in future years that there will be significant increases in global coverage because of the introduction of new systems in India, Turkey, and Brazil, as Irina was mentioning, and also because of the expansion of the scope in the China national ETS and in the introduction of the EU ETS too. And this is also a good moment to remind everybody that you can stay up to date with the latest news, both in the ICAP website, in our news, and of course in future editions of the status report. Moving on to the next slide, we will see the sectoral coverage of emission trading systems. Here, for those of you who have been following our report for the past few years, you may note that we have now expanded our categorization of sectoral coverage to include mining and extractives, which used to be incorporated in industry. And also we have introduced fuel use in agriculture and or forestry. This is something that we have been doing in coordination with our friends at the World Bank to improve the alignment between our status report and their state and trends, but mostly to improve alignment with the IPCC emission reporting categories. We, in future years, as systems change their scope, expand their scope, and more systems come online, we hope to see more of these tiles colored. And it may also be interesting to note that the same jurisdictions may cover different sectors with different instruments, and we can think, for example, about Germany, Austria, and the UETS2 that Irina was also mentioning, or also the states, some states in the northeast of the United States that are considering the role that emissions trading can play in their policy mix, in addition to the systems that they already implement. The next slide will show us developments in allowance prices. Here we have two panels. The panel on the left shows more of a historical perspective of how allowance prices have evolved over time in the past 10 years. And here we can note that for the past half a decade, we had seen a very significant increase in prices, in allowance prices. And also specifically in 2023, we saw some of a decrease in some prices, whereas other systems had seen increase in their price as well. Now, in the right panel, we see not the historical perspective, but specifically 2024, and we can see that for most systems, we cannot identify either an upward or a downward trend on prices throughout the year. In the next slide, we will see how a sister infographic to the one that we were just seeing, which is on revenues, the revenues that are collected by different systems. And I would like to invite everybody to keep these stable prices that we had seen in 2024 when thinking a bit about this graph. What we see in this graph is that after several years of record increases in revenues collected in 2024 decreased versus the revenues collected in 2023. This is, however, not the first time that a drop in revenues has happened. The last time that this happened was in 2016. If we look a bit deeper into the data, we can see that the total drop in revenues in 2024 was of around $5.7 billion. The EU by itself represents a drop of $5 billion. Without the EU, on average, we could see that the increase in the revenues in some systems and the decrease in revenue collection in some systems would make the aggregate number look mostly flat. Some of the systems in which revenue increased were Germany, Austria, Regi, and South Korea. And some in which revenue collection decreased was the UK, Washington, California, and Alberta. Here it is important to mention that for most systems, the revenues are a function of the number of allowances that are sold in auctions and the price at which the allowances are sold in auctions. And mostly because of decreasing caps, many ETSs tend to auction less and less allowances every year. This is a feature of these systems. We can mention, for example, the UK that in 2023 sold 79 million allowances versus 2024, in which they sold 69 million allowances, or Germany that in 2023 sold 358 million allowances, and in 2024 sold 294 million allowances. So a system that increased in revenue collection and a system that decreased in revenue collection both tend to have tended to auction-less allowances as a design, as part of the design of the systems. In the future, it will be interesting to see which of these two drivers, prices and amount of allowances auction, will prevail in terms of the revenue that these systems collect. The next slide will allow me to introduce you to a new infographic this year in the status report, which is about the potential or theoretical demand for offset credits in ETSs according to current system design. So right here, we're not looking at actual demand for carbon credits, but at the potential given the design of the systems. Offset credits are increasingly becoming key features of ETS design, particularly in newly implemented systems. We can note here that out of the 38 ETSs globally, 24 allow domestic offsets for compliance, and South Korea is the only one that accepts international credits. All other systems accept only domestic offsets. These domestic offsets obviously have been the current focus in ETSs, but we can speculate that progress with Article 6 implementation might encourage demand for international units in the future. We can also speculate or expect that compliance-driven demand for offsets could soar in the coming years, but it might be constrained by generous free allocation and low allowance prices. And here it's also perhaps worth mentioning that offset rules and domestic crediting standards can be somewhat difficult to navigate for some compliance entities. If you want to look at some of the numbers that we present here, we can mention that the three largest potential markets that are visible in ETSs are the China national ETS with a potential demand of 264 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions, Indonesia with 257 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions, and Kazakhstan with 167 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions. The aggregate theoretical demand that we can see in ETSs would be of around 880 megatons of CO2 equivalent emissions. And here, I would like to invite everybody to look at the fact sheets for specific systems. There you might find some information about actual demand for offset credits for compliance. We can think this is important because we can think, for example, that in California, because of the way that the compliance cycle works, it might not be of much use to check year on year how many credits have been surrendered for compliance. We can also note that, for example, for Kazakhstan, no offset use actually took place in 2023. Finally, we can mention that high demand systems such as China and Indonesia are still in the process of setting up their compliance rules and mechanisms. So we are looking forward to see more developments on those systems in the future. With that, we can move to the next slide and back to you, Stefano, for the remainder of the session.
Thank you, Victor and Irina, for the great and concise overview. As Victor said, we would encourage you all to have a look at the report itself and see what information and data stands out for you. And at the same time, as you probably know, the ICAP website is a great resource for all possible information related to ETS design and implementation. So I would also encourage you to have a look at the report. There you can find the same information that we have in the status report fact sheets, also organized in the interactive ETS map. The information on prices and revenues that Victor just presented is available on the ICAP allowance price explorer, and more broadly, you will find a lot of information related to the state of play in ETS implementation. Now, if we move on to the next slide, and we will also move on to the next segment of the webinar, I wanted to quickly remind all of you that you can at any time put any question or comment you might have in the Q&A function of the webinar, and we will be coming to those right after an initial round of panel discussion. But moving on to the next slide, I wanted to invite my panelists to come on the virtual stage and unmute themselves and turn their camera on. I will quickly introduce them and then we'll dive into the discussion. So together with us today, we have two colleagues from the European Commission, Ruben Vermeeren from DG Klima and Maya Alexandra Dittel, also from DG Klima, but Maya comes from the newly established task force on carbon markets and pricing diplomacy. So in a second, we will get to the panel discussion. I'll be asking Ruben to comment and tell us a bit more about the domestic implementation of the EU ETS, and then I'll ask Maya to comment more on the general and global trends on ETS developments, but also on the work that the task force is doing to help countries to develop and implement emission trading systems. We also have with us Alice Karczewska from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero in the UK, Meenakshi Sinha from the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India, working on the development of the Indian emission trading system, Hongmin Liu from the Environmental Defense Fund in China, who works really closely on the Chinese ETS, and Dan Beasley from the Climate Finance and Economics Unit at the World Bank. As I mentioned before, the World Bank is a great and long-standing partner and ally for ICAP on a number of different fronts across capacity building, across the knowledge sharing and report production work that we do. So I will be asking Dan to comment from his vantage point what they make of the trends that they observe, but also what they see out of the capacity building and technical support that they provide to developing countries and emerging economies that are working on ETS. But we'll get to that in a second. So starting from Ruben and Maya, I would like to ask you to do two things, which is also what I will ask the other panelists a bit later on. I would ask you to first of all quickly comment on whether any of the key trends and developments that we presented, any of the data that we just presented stood out for you in terms of interesting trends and developments that you are observing. But then I would also ask you to tell us a bit more about what is happening in your jurisdiction and what you're working on back home. So maybe let's start with Maya, and I will ask you from the point of view of the task force, what are again the key trends and developments that you are seeing around the world, and what you are learning out of these first few engagements that you're having with jurisdictions that are developing emission trading systems. With that, Maya, we'll go to you first.
Perfect, and thank you very much for having invited me to this panel, and also congratulations for this really informative report. I have to say, the report very much echoed also with our findings. So I think there was nothing that stood out to me in this term of big surprises. I think I very much would echo what you have stated in the report. So fully agree, the momentum for emissions trading system fully remains. We see it in particular in the Asia Pacific region, which is the region I also focus on in my work on the task force. And where we have seen that, for example, now ETS proposals have been submitted to the parliament, both in Turkey and Japan, taking the very broad concept of Asia here. We've seen that India is taking forward the steps with a baseline and credit system. Many ASEAN countries are considering developing some form of emissions trading system. We've seen that Indonesia is looking at their system, further expanding it or considering to expand it and improving it. So very much echoing what you have also found in your report. I think also another point that you've also mentioned is the systems are more innovative. So they are not a copy-paste of what we have done in Europe. Very clearly, I mean, I mentioned the baseline and credit system, which we see in Australia, which we see in India. We see combinations of taxes. Indonesia was in the lead, I think, there, but has now adopted the idea from our latest understanding. But other ASEAN countries like Malaysia are still looking at a combination of ETS and taxes. And I think this is also something, for example, that we see in Chile, taking it more globally. Carbon credits, very prominent in all the systems that we looked at, mainly looking at domestic offsets. But also, as you said, as was just said by Victor, actually we see that there's very little demand for these domestic offsets. So there is the combinations are foreseen, but then in the end, domestic offsets are not really being used for compliance, or very limited use we see. And then we see South Korea and possibly also Japan looking at international credits for compliance. But I think, I mean, this is all very encouraging, but I think there's also always a but, and that but we also see very much in the ASEAN countries. First of all, in terms of the length it takes. So for considering the systems, so there seems a continuous consideration of we're looking into it, we will develop it, and it always gets postponed by a year and then another year. And even when there are concrete proposals being put forward, the timeline for actually putting it into place is simply too long, and too long for what is needed to actually be on track with 1.5 and climate neutrality goals. And I think that's very much a question of political will as well. We've seen that it's possible to set up system much faster, looking at Washington, for example. And somewhat linked to that is also that we see that the ambition level and incidentally the price levels are generally too low in the system that we're seeing emerging. That's often due to design elements. So we've mentioned the caps. The caps are not very effective at capping emissions. Sometimes there's no cap. Most caps are intensity-based. And whilst in Europe we're moving away from free allocation, we see that many of the systems, in particular in the Asia-Pacific region, are still based on 100% free allocation and no intention to move to auctioning or auctioning in the long term. Another trend that we see, and I think that's more for the Asia-Pacific region than the rest of the world, is that we see a bit of a lack of policy synergies, and we see a need for broader structural reforms. And that's in particular when you look at the power sector, where we have heavily regulated energy systems, those of subsidies that basically undermine the effectiveness of emissions trading systems that are being developed. And that also often goes hand in hand with the governance issues or a lack of coordination between different ministries and ministries having conflicting policy agendas. Ultimately, I think many of these issues come down to a sort of fear that putting in place an effective emissions trading system, so a system that is effective at reducing emissions, will harm the economy or society. I think there's generally a need to still better educate how an emissions trading system can be designed without harming economy and also harming society too much. And I think that's something that we need to still work, like where we need to still pass the message stronger on and educate better on. I think I would leave it here because I think my dimension wasn't limited to a few minutes. So, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Maya, and I would fully agree with you on your observations of what the key trends and but also the key challenges are. And I mean, there's obviously a lot of work that can and should be done to promote the uptake of effective emission trading systems globally. And on that, I mean, we're looking forward as ICAP to work closely with the task force, but also with colleagues from the World Bank to help building the capacity and the readiness for that. I would like to go to Ruben next with the not easy ask to please tell us in a few minutes what is happening at the European level on emission trading systems.
How many minutes do I have, Stefano?
2.5. No, I'm kidding. Less than 5 if possible.
All right. Okay. Just give me a signal when I need to wrap up. But first of all, indeed, I'll focus on the EU ETS. But first of all, to say congratulations also from my side on the report. It's always it's a report we use a lot in practice, in many presentations to prepare bilaterals for our commissioner or visits from our international colleagues. So it's always good to have it. As to the ETS, the EU ETS. So indeed, your slides showed that we now account for around 10% of the overall emissions covered by an emissions trading system, and that we generate around half of the overall revenues in 2024. So it was around 39 billion, which indeed is a bit lower than the year before. There are various reasons for it. On the supply side, on the demand side, we had a bit more supply also because of this REPowerEU initiative. On the demand side, we had lower power sector emissions. So that then results in lower demand and a lower price. There's also correlation with the price for natural gas, which dropped in 2024 compared to the still very high prices in 2023. So that was another reason why we had slightly less revenues last year. The price is now even around 60 euros per ton, so it dropped quite a bit also as a result of the tariffs in the past few days. Again, following the gas price. Now, good reasons to assume revenues will go up again in the near future because we have, of course, ETS2 coming in, a system almost as big as the ETS1, and no free allocation in that system. So everything will be auctioned there. And also in ETS1, we will start phasing out free allocation as a result of the CBAM. So also those allowances will be auctioned and will be generating revenues. Looking at the emissions last year, we just published them last week. Overall, the picture is not bad. Emissions were 5% below emissions in 2023. So year on year, we have a 5% reduction of emissions. That's good, but it's not great in the sense that when you calculate how much we should do according to our CAP, according to our linear reduction factor, that is around 4.4%. But the 5% that we did year on year represents only 3% compared to the CAP, so compared to 2005. And so we're doing less than we should do. That's not the fault of the power sector. Power sector is doing more than it should. That's normal in an ETS. It has lower abatement costs, so it comes first. It reduced emissions by 12% compared to 2023, thanks to good output from renewables, 8% more renewables output, nuclear 5% more. And then there was a decrease in gas by 8% and by coal, and with coal by 15%. So that is relatively good news on the power sector side. Not such good news on the industry side, where there are virtually no improvements. So 0% emission reductions in the stationary installations outside the power sector. So the steel, cement, the chemical plants, they are reducing their emissions only when they reduce their output. When they increase their output, their emissions go up accordingly. So there we need to do more, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Aviation, even worse, plus 15%. So that's record emissions in that sector, and obviously not going in the right direction. So 2 points maybe to follow up on that. One, where does this leave us compared to our target? So we are now 50% below 2005 emissions. So we're halfway there towards climate neutrality. And it means that for 2030, we still have 12.5% to go in the remaining years of this decade. For industry, it means they need to step up their emission reductions. Competitiveness is getting a lot of attention these days, not only in the Commission, but worldwide, I think. Our strategy is the Clean Industrial Deal. It was published not in 2024, but in February of this year. And it's basically a broad strategy for how we can get industry to net zero and still be competitive. That means creating lead markets for green products. That means more financial support at EU level, but also via state aid. We've announced a new industrial decarbonization bank, which will be financed partly from ETS revenues, we're aiming at 100 billion of support via that instrument. And we really need that to work. We're thinking about carbon contracts for difference as a way to assign that support. We also need CBAM to work, and so we're working on simplifying it. There's a simplification proposal now being discussed by the co-legislators. So I think we are doing our bit to create a framework that is helpful and conducive to change in industry. We also need, of course, industry to do its bit. Very quick to look back at 2024, we made good progress with implementing the 2023 review that Irina was already referring to. New rules on how to account for permanent carbon capture and utilization in permanent products, such as construction products. New rules on the reporting on auction revenues, new rules on monitoring and reporting, also for the ETS2. There's a CAP decision for the ETS2. A lot is happening on the ground to implement this system. Also for the Social Climate Fund, which is a crucial accompanying measure for the ETS2. Member states are preparing their plans. They have until June to send us their plans with measures to protect vulnerable groups from the impacts of the new ETS2. And we'll be approving those plans. And then we have made a start with our review, our upcoming review in 2026 for the period after 2030. So today we have a cap that goes until 2030, and we want to align that cap with a new 2040 target. But we're also looking at new elements there. For example, the inclusion of the waste sector, waste incineration, maybe also landfilling. We're looking at CCU in non-permanent products, which is very closely linked to the waste, because you can follow the carbon molecule inside these non-permanent products until the end of their lifetime. And we're looking at the integration possibly of permanent removals in the ETS as we come closer to a situation where there are ever fewer emissions in the ETS, ever harder to abate, and that may be better replaced rather than abated. So that I always say that there will soon be a public consultation on that proposal, but it's still not out. But we really hope it comes out either this week or the next. I'll stick to that. I realize I've gone slightly over time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ruben, and no worries about going over time. There's obviously a lot happening in Europe, and it's never a boring day for an ETS policymaker in Brussels. And thank you for condensing all of that in a really concise and clear overview. I would like to go to Alice next with a similar ask. So, can you tell us in 4 or 5 minutes? Anything that stood out for you, and also what the UK has been up to lately when it comes to ETS policy making?
Thank you, Stefano, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I also just want to start first by saying thank you so much for the invitation to speak today, and also huge congratulations on the publication of the report to you, Stefano, and also, of course, the rest of the wonderful ICAP team. We really, really valued the report in the UK. On the one hand, it's an incredible resource for our policymakers to see what other developed ETS jurisdictions have achieved and are working on, and what we might learn from others. And on the other hand, it's very helpful for international outreach on carbon pricing, to see a global snapshot of ETS developments, and particularly note those jurisdictions that are in the early stages of implementing an ETS. So yeah, thank you, and I look forward to reading the report in further detail as well. So I'll start with some reflections on the report, and I'll move on and provide some updates on what 2024 has looked like for us in terms of UK ETS policy developments. So in terms of reflections, I have 3 key areas that I would like to note, and similar to what others have said as well. So first, I would like to recognize the increasing scale of ETS uptake globally. It's really, really great to see that ETSs have emerged as a preferred policy tool for many governments. And currently now we have 38 ETSs in operation, and even many more in development. And in particular, it's really encouraging to see that emerging economies now driving the next wave of system development and implementation. My team and I lead on UK ETS international cooperation, and one of our key objectives is to promote carbon pricing globally and share our experience of setting up the UK ETS. So with more and more ETSs in development, my team stand ready to support anyone who might find that valuable by sharing our experience. The second thing I want to note is that jurisdictions are thinking about what form of ETS works best for them. And in their domestic context, and are increasingly adapting non-standard cap and trade schemes by, for example, looking at hybrid schemes where an ETS works in parallel with a carbon tax, and also looking at how carbon credits can be supplement the compliance schemes. It is, I think, really, really important to maintain a global uptake of carbon pricing and emissions trading. And I think it can only be done by adopting these novel approaches and really taking note of what works for stakeholders in their kind of domestic landscape. And finally, I also want to note the role of emissions trading in the road to net zero. ETSs are increasingly seen as essential tools in achieving net zero emissions and perhaps even net negative emissions. And I know this is something ICAP colleagues also been looking at the ETS Reloaded report. But I think it's also important for ETS to remain an important policy tool in the years to come. And this is something that we have also been thinking about in the UK. So we're looking to introduce greenhouse gas removals, GGRs, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a second. So those were my key reflections, and I'll now move on to UK ETS updates. Maybe just to quickly kick off with a little bit of scene setting. So the UK ETS has been in operation for approximately 4 years. It was introduced in 2021 following our departure from the EU ETS, and it's run by what we call the UK ETS Authority. And this is a governing body that consists of the UK government, Scottish government, Welsh government, and also the Northern Ireland Executive. Our ETS covers emissions from the power, energy intensive and aviation sectors, and it covers approximately 25% of our emissions. So in terms of 2024, so this has been a really, really busy period of active policy development and reform for us. I will focus on 3 areas in particular. First, road to net zero. Second, scope expansion. And finally, also our approach to carbon leakage mitigation. So firstly, on net zero, back in 2019, we legislated for net zero emissions and have subsequently adopted a net zero strategy. And it's our aim that the UK ETS plays an important role in achieving this goal. We recognise that ETS is not the only policy to achieve net zero, but it's a really, really important lever. And to reflect this commitment, since the 1st of January 2024, we have aligned the UK ETS cap with a net zero trajectory. And this has resulted in a 30% reduction in the UK ETS cap, and it will reduce from 156 million allowances in 2021 to 50 million allowances by 2030. And with these changes, we're also aiming to provide a clear signal for businesses on our intention to reach net zero. Also, in relation to net zero, we have consulted on the integration of engineered greenhouse gas removals, GGRs, in the UK ETS. And last May, we consulted further on how we plan to do this. So we were asking questions about how the market could be designed and what participation requirements could be set. We see the inclusion of engineered greenhouse gas removals in the UK ETS as helping incentivize investment, but providing a significant source of demand for GGRs from polluting sectors. But also importantly, it will future-proof the ETS that continues to play a key role in delivering our net zero goals. The second update is on scope expansion, and this is something that was also covered in your kind of presentation on the key updates on the UK ETS. So in the last year, we have consulted on expanding the scope of the UK ETS to waste incineration and energy waste from 2026. And this will also include a 2-year monitoring, reporting and verification transitional period from 2026 until the end of 2027. By expanding the scheme to cover waste incineration facilities, we are placing a cap on a greater proportion of UK emissions and will support the waste sector to decarbonise in a most efficient way, reflecting also the waste hierarchy that we have in the UK. We also consulted on maritime sector in November 2024, where we set out the main details and features of expanding the UK ETS to maritime from 2026, and also looked at possible future expansion of the maritime sector in the future. We have outlined that the scheme is likely to apply based on vessel activity, and we're also minded to implement a threshold of 5,000 gross tonnage and above for the maritime sector. And the final update is on carbon leakage mitigation. So we have been doing an extensive review of fuel allocation to ensure that it's working effectively in the UK, in context both incentivize emissions reduction, protect energy intensive trade exposed industries from the risk of carbon leakage. Last year, we confirmed that the UK Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, so the UK CBAM, will be introduced on the 1st of January 2027. But we're also looking at how the UK ETS and free allocation policy in particular should interact with the UK CBAM. So looking at whether we need to adjust allowances for sectors that will be covered by the CBAM. However, our overarching aim is to mitigate carbon leakage risk and ensure that this approach is holistic. And finally, the very latest development on the UK ETS side, we committed to continuing the UK ETS beyond 2030 and until at least 2050 in our long-term pathway a couple of years ago now. But in February, so just a month and a bit ago, we launched a consultation seeking views on proposals to extend the UK ETS into a second phase from 1st of January 2031 onwards. So a lot is going on. Hopefully that was a useful update. And yes, happy to take also any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. I mean, similarly to Ruben, you managed to condense a lot in a really quick and clear overview. So thank you for that. I would like to go to Meenakshi next and ask you to share a bit of an update on the ETS development process in India, which anyone working in this space will know that it is something that caught a lot of headlines and attentions over the last few months. So we'd like to ask you to provide in a few minutes a really quick overview of what the process looks like and how that is going in India. And thank you for joining us.
So thank you, Stefano. And first of all, thanks for inviting us. And finally, I got to join this event. I faced a lot of technical issues. So not taking much time, I'll first tell you how this carbon market came into picture. So first of all, we amended our Energy Conservation Act in 2022. The compliance mechanism came into picture through CCTS notification in June 23. And then we also included the offset mechanism, which is a voluntary carbon market in December 23. So in case of compliance, we are covering 9 energy intensive sectors, and we have also published the procedure document for the compliance mechanism, and we have also developed the accreditation procedure and eligibility criteria for verification agencies, which will help the stakeholders to better understand all the procedures and all the activities happening within the carbon market of India. So if I talk about the baseline and credit system, where who is the overachiever gets the credit and who are the underachiever, they have to purchase the credits. Then our coverage is we are covering scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and with whatever targets which are giving to the industries is getting notified under an Environmental Protection Act, not under Energy Conservation Act. So in the Ministry of Power and Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, both the ministries are involved in development of the carbon credit trading scheme. So our targets are annual, and we are allowing all the banking as unlimited, and the power exchange. Then if I talk, we did the rigorous process of setting the targets, then analysis, we did the baseline emission profiling, then we also studied all the potential diffusion and implementations, like all the technology, whether it is energy efficiency, renewable energy, fuel switches, etc. Then we calculated the marginal abatement cost. Based on that, these analyses, we estimated the emission targets. Then I'll talk about this is a crux of the compliance mechanism, and soon we will be notifying the targets for these sectors. So what sectors is included is iron and steel, cement, pulp and paper, petrochemical, textile, aluminium, refinery, fertilizer, and chlor-and-alkyl. So targets are already, we have finalized it for the 4 sectors, and soon it will be notified within 2 months, I guess. And we'll do the trading in October 2026, probably. Then if I talk about the offset market, then offset market, we have recently we have published the procedure document for the offset mechanism, and we have also developed the methodologies for the 5 sectors, like under offset mechanism, which is energy sector, industry, waste handling and disposable, agriculture, and forestry. So not only this, we have also developed the our Indian carbon market portal, and we are also developing the registry, which is based on the blockchain. We are trying to learn from various countries from EU or UK, or we are following and we are grasping all the good initiatives and good actions. We are trying to do it very transparency. We are trying to adhere to the these things so that it is very user friendly. The portal is very user friendly, and everybody get to know everything which is being posted. Nothing is hidden, and we are also working upon blockchain, which is also an added advantage for using to be used as internationally. And it is we are also discussing for bilateral transactions also interoperability of these registry. So many things are happening, and in coming 6 months we will be by God grace we will be operational if everything goes fine. So that's all from our side. Thank you.
Thank you for the great overview, and again, congratulations on the impressive and really quick progress on developing and launching the compliance carbon market in India. We are keeping an eye, a close eye on that, and we're looking forward to see what is coming next. Again, congratulations to you and colleagues for all the great work. I will go to Hongmin next with a similar question. I mean, a lot of work is also going into the Chinese ETS, especially for what concerns the expansion of the scope. Can you give us a really quick overview on what is happening on the policy-making front in China?
Thank you, Stefano, and thank you for having me in this great event, and also congratulations on this report release. The ICAP report has become a handy tool for me as an ADS expert for referencing when I'm trying to understand more globally ETS status. This kind of report is actually not only helping the readers understanding the ETS status globally, but also helping build the common consensus and the consensus for, and also trying to build the confidence for using the carbon price addressing climate change. I think this is really a great report. Regarding your question about the China National ETS, I'd like to say ICAP colleague has been mentioned. The major progress for the China National ETS have been done in the past year is the expansion towards the iron, steel, aluminum, and cement sector, which is actually originally this is really the first expansion after 2021, which is the launch of the China National ETS. And this is the first time to expanding the ETS towards the industry sector for curbing the industry emissions. And it's expanded to non-CO2. It's the first time to covering the CF4, the C2F6, the two non-CO2 greenhouse gases, and also expanding the participants and the emissions, which is after the expanding to the 3 additional sectors, the China National ETS will adding to 3 billion additional annually coverage for the GHG emissions, and also will covering more about 1,500 enterprises into the system, which will be 3,500 enterprises in total covered by the China National ETS. Actually, the official expansion working plan just announced last month in March 26, and which is said the 3 additional sectors will be required for compliance by the end of this year for their emissions for the 2024. And also, but definitely there's still including the power sector and the 3 additional sectors are still subjecting to the free allocation and intensity-based cap. It's not absolute cap yet. Regarding the current price, I'd like to say we can see the price has been increased, like doubled with the highest price, which is originally when the ETS launched in 2021, the starting price was about $6. $6. But in 2024, the highest carbon price in China National ETS, the CEA price, was achieved about $15, and the average price in 2024 actually reached about $13. And at the beginning of this year, it's reached about 11 or $12. So we can see this is it's almost double the average price compared to the first compliance period. And also, I'd like to share a little bit about the new trends of the China National ETS. It's about the offset program, which is well known as the CCER. And actually, the CCER is relaunched since last year. And there was 4 methodologies approved by the government originally, which are the forestry, the mangrove afforestation, and also the thermal power generation, and also the offshore wind power generation. And we can see at the beginning of this year, there was 2 additional methodology approved, which is the utilization of the low concentration gas of coal mine, and also the energy saving of the highway tunnel lighting system. And we can see as of this year, the first bunch of the CCER, the new CCERs in the new system actually has been issued. About 9 million tons of the CO2 has been generated in the new system. But the 9 million tons of the CO2 generated, the offset credits generated in the system were measured from the offshore wind power generation and the thermal power generation. And the price of the CCER are about about $10 for the CCER at present. We can see it's much higher than the regular voluntary carbon market price, because the CCER has the compliance purpose for the national ETS. But I have to have another one, just last comments about the number shared by the ICAP report on the 2 million demands on the national ETS compliance market for the CCR credits. I believe this is the theoretical calculating demands, but it's actually subject to the really the market actually price and the actual allowances allocated towards the emitting allocated towards the compliance entity. Really subject to or really well leveraging the actual demands on the CCR credits. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thanks, Ming, for both the great overview of the developments in China and for this last point. You're fully right. What we did in the report was to look at what the maximum theoretical demand for offset credit use in ETS could be. But then, as Victor pointed out, if you look at what reality looks like, you actually have a big difference in many systems between the theoretical demand and what is actually happening in reality, because there are a number of factors which you also touched on that comes into play and that do play a role in determining a difference between what can happen in theory and what happens in practice. But yeah, very well, very good point and well taken. I want to come to Dan next before going to Q&A, asking you to provide also a very quick update from your perspective and from the vantage point of someone that works closely on ETS developments with countries in Europe and in Central Asia. Can you tell us a bit more about what are the key developments that you are seeing?
Thank you, Stefano, and congratulations to ICAP for this latest status report. So yeah, I'm based in Ankara, and I do a lot of work on emission trading systems in Eastern Europe and Central Asia region. We've certainly seen, picking up on one of the trends that you identified in the report, we've certainly seen a strong growing interest in the last couple of years in carbon pricing, in part in response to the EU CBAM. That was certainly a big factor in progressing the conversation in Turkey. But we're also seeing real interest develop in Azerbaijan and a couple of other jurisdictions in the region, and of course accession to the EU is always a factor, particularly in Western Balkans and Ukraine in progressing carbon pricing. So it's a big year this year for Kazakhstan. This year they need to set their caps for 2026 to 2030, and this will be a defining moment for them in determining whether the ETS really plays a constructive role in achieving their NDC, and as a consequence, whether they've got a real chance of meeting their NDC. And so it's a really important period for them in really determining their ability to meet their climate targets. At the same time, they're also setting this year target for 2035. Which will, of course, play a big role potentially in the future caps under the emissions trading system. And they also want to introduce legislation to allow auctioning starting in the same period, 2026 to 2030. So that would be great because it would start to raise some revenue from the ETS for government. In Turkey, the report mentions there's been a lot of developments on emissions trading. There's a climate law that's currently in Parliament that establishes the legal basis for the emissions trading system and also a domestic crediting system. Now, there's some developed thinking about how the emissions trading system will look like. None of that is set in stone. It needs to be consulted with stakeholders and go through the political process. But the current thinking is to start next year, if possible, with a pilot phase that would have an emissions intensity based cap, bottom up approach to cap setting. It would cover the CBAM sector, so electricity plus the 4 relevant CBAM sectors, and would be fully allocated, so no auctioning. That's some of the initial thinking, and then move to a more formal full implementation around 2028, where you would start to see potential expansion to the rest of industry. You would see introduction of auctioning, and the intention is to set up, during the pilot phase, set up a domestic crediting system that would be able to provide offsets to ETS companies under that full implementation phase. Although crediting, takes a while to set up, so we're not, it's not clear when offsets might then be available, but that's the broad idea. Another trend we're seeing in the region is for countries to have a predisposition to copy the EU ETS design. So the first thought is let's follow how the EU ETS is developed, and I think it's important to recognise that the EU has a number of constraints when it designs policy that perhaps individual countries do not have when designing their emissions trading system. It's important to learn from the EU as well as potentially copy some of its elements. A good example that we see in discussions in ETS countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia is their first thought is to deal with price management through implementing a market stability reserve, and a market stability reserve is a very complex way of managing price, and so it's important for countries to also think about other ways that could be done. A reserve price at auction, for example, is a very simple way of implementing some form of price management, and we see that in other ETSs around the world. So that's some of the developments, Stefano, that we've seen in the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Really interesting, and I would agree with you with your assessment of what the key trends and also challenges are in the region. We are almost at the end of the webinar, but I want to come to some of the questions we received, and then I will recognize Dirk for closing the webinars and trying to make sense of this discussion from his point of view as a co-chair of ICAP. But before we get there, I have 3 questions that I wanted to pose to some of you. I will ask you to address them in no more than 30 seconds. We have a question for the UK. So Alice, could you tell us really quickly what are the next steps for the integration of engineered removals in the UK ETS? One question for Meenakshi, asking when the baseline values will be and the targets will be released for covered sectors, and a super quick question on Ruben, asking for what's the latest on the discussion on integration of carbon credits into the EU ETS. So 30 seconds each, starting from Alice. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, on GGR. So in May 2024, we launched a consultation to integrate engineered greenhouse gas removals into the UK ETS. And we looked at specifically at the principles for policy design, CAP policy options, allowance design, permanence, and also pathways to integration, where we identified 2028 as the earliest feasible date for GGR's integration. This consultation closed in August 2024. We're currently analysing the responses, and a government response to this consultation is expected in due course.
Thank you. Super concise and clear. Meenakshi, when can we expect to see the baselines and targets for the covered sectors and entities?
So for the 4 sectors, the target notification is already in Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So soon it will be pre-published for the public comments, and then I think within 2.5 months it will be published. Thank
you. And last but not least, Ruben, can you tell us in 30 seconds what is the latest on use of international credits in Europe?
Yes, so on international credits, we're not looking at that at the moment. We have a domestic target for 2030. We have a domestic target for 2050. We are waiting to see what the 2040 target will look like. But our review clause, and that's also the one that we will indeed be consulting upon in the next week, is about domestic permanent removals and whether to integrate those in the EU ETS, not international credits. It's not just because we have a trauma. It's from the past. It's also looking at the future. Maybe I can take one half a minute on the question on CBAM in the chat, as I promised, on LDCs. Just to say that, yes, also there we will be publishing a report before the end of the transitional period of the CBAM on the impacts of CBAM on least developed countries. But there are simply not many developing countries exporting CBAM goods to the EU. So that is already one insight. Another one is that with the simplification, we are increasing the threshold for importers to be covered by CBAM. So to the extent imports are coming from least developed countries, they may that a threshold and therefore not called by CBAM. But we're always happy to explain to such countries via our delegation or directly from Brussels how they can cope with the CBAM. Sorry for talking very fast.
No problem. Thank you, Ruben, and thank you all for the great responses, but also for the great insights that you shared on the panel discussion. I now want to recognize Dirk Weinreich from the German Ministry of Economy and the Climate Action, who is also serving as the co-chair of ICAP, for a quick closing word and for trying to condense everything that we discussed in a few closing messages. So Dirk, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and hello to everyone. I'm very sorry that I could not participate in the whole meeting. This is also due that we had intensive talks with China this morning, a subject this is which is also will have been touched here. I was informed, nevertheless, by my colleagues that you had a very insightful session. Thank you to all the panelists for their valuable insights, and of course thank you very much to the ICAP Secretariat for preparing this important last status report, not the last one in the future, the newest, and also for preparing this webinar. It's encouraging to see strong participation. When I came in, I counted over 80 persons. Now it's a bit diminished, but this is very good. It shows growing global interest in the ETS as a key climate tool. And maybe from a more general perspective, as I could not take part in all of the seminar, it is clear from the status report that the ETS is expanding worldwide. More jurisdictions are implementing or considering carbon markets. More sectors will be covered, including maritime, buildings, waste management. There is, of course, a clear background. The urgency of stronger climate action is quite clear. The last year, 2024, was the warmest year on the record. We make progress, but you all know that all our ambition, and with this also our ETS ambition, must increase rapidly to stay on track for the 1.5 degree goal of Paris. And it's clear that global collaboration is essential. So the harmonization of carbon markets will help to strengthen our effectiveness. I just want to name a few examples for the progress made in Europe and in Asia on the EU ETS. You will have been informed that we were expanding our system very widely, not only having now a separate ETS for emissions on the transport and building sectors from 2027 on, but also to cover shipping now, also internationally with half of the routes. And I just mentioned China. China has very concrete plans now to expand their large national ETS until now covering the power sector and expand it to industry sectors, important industry sectors like cement, steel, and aluminium industries. This will be very ambitious. It will cover more than 3 billion tons of additional CO2 emissions. So it cannot be underestimated what that means if they come under a meaningful ETS. India has adopted regulations to establish an intensity-based baseline and credit system, and I congratulate for that. You heard something about this in the panel. So this is also, I think, an important step to move forward. Priorities for making progress on ETS will, of course, be to tighten the emission caps, to drive deeper decarbonization, and to come closer to our net zero targets. We should align our ETS with net zero goals, long-term strategies. That means also that we all need to think about a very clever policy mix. ETS is important, but can never walk alone in this regard. And it will, of course, be necessary to ensure a very fair and inclusive transition, especially supporting vulnerable sectors and vulnerable communities and citizens. These are very important tasks. So just to close, ETS will continue to be a key tool in our achieving our global climate goals. We, as policymakers or advisors, should all act with urgency and ambition to strengthen carbon markets. I can, by the way, just tell for my government, which is in the process of forming, we will clearly stick to our net zero 2045 goal, and also to the ambitious ETS role in that process. ICAP will continue to be the platform for dialogue, cooperation, and technical support on ETS. And with that, once again, thanks to all of you, especially the panelists and the colleagues from the Secretariat to be here, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. And we're over time and we're coming to a close, but I also wanted to say a big thank you from my side to all of you for speaking on the webinar today. So thank you to the panelists, thank you to Dirk, and thank you to my colleagues, Victor and Irina. Also a big thank you to the whole ICAP team, who was really busy working on the report over the last few months. And a big thank you, obviously, to all ICAP members, observers, and other jurisdictions that have supported us with the development of the report. And last but not least, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Again, there's a lot happening, so watch this space, and let's keep in touch as developments unfold. We're quite keen to see what will be coming next, and we are here to help ICAP members and the broader public navigate the upcoming challenges with ETS development and implementation. So thanks for your attention. The webinars, recordings, and presentations will be made available. The report is already on our website. And with that, thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.